Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for making the time to view this presentation today. We'll be talking about industrial cybersecurity and what it means for our clients. Specifically in this space, there's been a lot of buzz in the news, and a lot of companies are struggling to figure out what it means to them, what the risks are, what the benefits are, and a lot of systems integrators, distributors, we're all trying to figure out what kind of opportunities exist in this space. So the agenda today is going to be a brief introduction of myself, Chris Hamilton, and then I have a couple of slides on GrantTech and what our offerings are. I'm really going to skip through that in the material provided afterwards. You'll be able to look through that and learn a little bit more about our company if you're not familiar. And then we'll get into the content here, which is where exactly is cybersecurity a risk today, and what can partnerships like Royal, CED, and Grantek do about that? Then the next question I get is who buys cybersecurity and why? And more important than that is who doesn't buy cybersecurity, and then how do we educate them in order to turn them into someone who does? Then we'll have a brief discussion around kind of Grantek's pre-canned service offerings, so you're familiar with that. Again, in the presentation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. I'll provide that information in the email deck so you can go back and reference it. Then we'll go through a couple of success stories talking about the volume of projects that GrantTech has done, the location, and of course for you guys concentrating on the revenue that would be generated through your Rockwell distributor partnership and Panduit, et cetera. So a brief introduction of myself. My name is Chris Hamilton. I'm the Director of Industrial IT Group at GrantTech, and I've been working in controls and automation for about 10 plus years and 15 in IT systems architectures and a focus in security. It wasn't necessarily called cybersecurity, but you had data transport, you had web systems, et cetera. I'm a co-chair of the NIST Cybersecurity Working Group with Eric Kossman, and that group strives to take documents like ISA 99 and various current industry happenings such as Wannacry and show how that relates to the industrial world and what the average plant guy can do about that. If you're on and wouldn't mind muting, that would be good. I hear a little bit of feedback. So specifically where I concentrate with our clients, our vendors and our partners is around bridging they call it the IT-OT gap. And what I mean, where I focus there is the political IT-OT gap. You guys have probably seen this in our clients where you get a bunch of IT guys in a room or you get a bunch of engineering guys in the room and they're not talking to each other. They don't like each other. They have historically not had to work together and they don't understand why in the new world they need to. So what we do is we start to have those discussions because in today's world they do need to work together. The business drivers that are demanding that you get immediate real-time data off the shop floors are causing them to work together whether they know they are or not. So smoothing that relationship over is a very good way to show value to our clients as well as generate new business. A little bit about GrantTech here. Again, these slides I'm going to skip through, but we are a Rockwell Solutions partner. We've been very involved in Rockwell throughout our existence. We're a strong North American presence, and our service offerings really go from the plant floor all the way to the boardroom. Locations, areas of expertise, industries, something you might want to reference, strategic partnerships, brief clients, and to stop here for a moment, our strategic initiatives, smart manufacturing, safety, and IIT. So at the bottom here, you see my group, which is the industrial IT group. Qualifications specifically in that space. Okay, on to the main agenda. Where is cybersecurity a risk today? And when you look at this historically, really what we have to concentrate on the fact that manufacturing has changed and evolved. We're not talking about islands of automation. We're not talking about air gaps. We're talking about a connected enterprise, to use Rockwell's term, or Industry 4.0, to use more European terminology. And as to why this matters and what exactly it is, I would go into a couple of examples and some of the documentation in the industry, specifically Verizon's DIBR report, which is a data breach investigations report they publish yearly. It talks about different industries from manufacturing through finance through healthcare, and it tries to give some interesting statistics around what happens. One of the key aspects of this is all the way back in 2014, they said 99.9% of vulnerabilities exploited were compromised more than a year after the CVE was published. So what does that mean? A CVE is the acknowledgement that a vulnerability exists and that they've released a patch. So if you have a Rockwell controller or a Rockwell piece of software and they go in, they realize that there's a problem, there's a security vulnerability, they fix it, they patch it, they publish that patch. So more than a year after that is when 99.9% of vulnerabilities are actually leveraged. If you're familiar with the Wannacry exploit, that was less than a year, but it was on the order of months after that vulnerability within the Samba was patched. So, we're talking about, in an organization that's mature and able to patch, a lot of this stuff can be eliminated. In the manufacturing world, of course, that's very difficult to do because we have legacy systems. We have systems that run for 20 plus years. We have 100% uptime, 24/7 manufacturing facilities. So you'll get a lot of resistance to even discussing what you could do to patch. And that's kind of where a company like GrantTech will be able to come in and start having those discussions, because our bread and butter is controls. We focus every day in the automation industry. We understand what manufacturing uptime is and what that means. The 3 a.m. calls, driving into the plant, bringing stuff back online, that's what we live. So for us to be going to our clients and saying, yes, you need to start implementing a process by which to patch, we're not going to come in. The difficulty that the IT side generally has is they just patch blind, walk away and leave it. Stuff might break, doesn't matter. In the office, okay, if someone's Outlook doesn't work, or Microsoft Word, then yeah, that's difficult. There's one person that's affected or a couple of people that's affected. On the manufacturing side, you're talking about failure to ship product. You're talking about failure to meet client deadlines, their clients. And the cost of that is hundreds of thousands of dollars or not more per hour, per shift. And that's something that GrantTech strives to work with the client in order to, create a position that does not happen. This is one of the, more well-known breaches, Saudi Aramco breach. So this was specifically targeted malware that destroyed the hard drives of over 35,000 computers. And what happened was, across the world, the IT response was pull the connection, pull the internet connection. They physically disconnected all of their systems from each other. So what that meant is that financial and business systems were offline. They were not able to do billing. They were not able to do tracking of materials, but they switched to paper, very, very slow, and they were able to kind of, limp along. In the connected enterprise and manufacturing, that's not going to be an option, right? When you have these systems connected and they're relying on each other for controls, for motion controls, for data exchanges, for handshakes, you can't just pull the plug and go back. Here's another section from the breach report talking about specifically what types of vulnerabilities there are. And this is kind of, everybody thinks of hacking and malware, but there's a large component of social engineering and user error. The person might not even be trying to do something wrong, but because they have blanket access to the rest of the systems, or they have wandered into an area where they're not supposed to, and they don't necessarily know what cable they're pulling, as simple as labeling cables, right? If they're pulling up the wrong cable, they could cause an outage. They could allow access or disallow access to a system that they should or should not. And that's something that we're starting to report on and does affect all of the industry. Um, to kind of tie that back into why our clients are going to act. So NIST originally published a cybersecurity framework for critical infrastructure in 2014. This was the result of President Obama's executive order stating that we will update our industry, we will update our infrastructure in order to be aware of and resist cyber threats. In January 2017, NIST released a comment period for updating that document. I believe April is when that closed. So what happens there is they're going to be implementing more regulation to critical infrastructure, and they're going to be starting to hold these companies accountable. That's the same thing that's going to start to happen in manufacturing. And what that means is if our clients aren't educated today and don't know exactly how to handle this, then there's going to be financial repercussions in the future. That in itself is going to be a motivator for them to act, and we should be there to help. So this, I thought, might be a good exercise for those of us that are able to see the screen. If you aren't familiar with the Shodan Project, it basically is a mapping of the internet. You know, there was a research project. They went out and they said, what is on the internet? And how do we find it? So if I do a search right now today, this is from today for Rockwell, and so come back with what I get. I find ENBT cards. I find L35 processors, and they're all over the world. Okay, here's one, here's one in Canada. But I thought about this webinar and I thought, well, what if we take that a little bit closer to home? So here is good old sunny California. And if I pull this up and give you a live view, you can actually drill down. Let's pick Los Angeles. And now these are devices that are directly plugged in to the open internet. So they could be a cell modem, they could be various other things, but we've got 5,291 devices that say they're Rockwell out there right now. So let's see, there was one out here in Ontario that I wanted to take a look at. And this is all publicly available information. So we've got right here, more or less, in Ontario, California, an L33 that is plugged right into the internet. If I were to pull up Logix and try to go online with one of these devices, more than likely I would be able to. I do not recommend doing that. Anyone who is not authorized connecting to a device would be a violation, and that would be potentially prosecutable. So don't do it. But this shows how vulnerable and the lack of awareness that the current industry has. And as you can see, most of these are devices plugged into wireless. So it's somebody bought a cell modem and they stuffed it in a panel somewhere. And a lot of times these are integrators because the client doesn't have a vendor remote access policy that works for the controls world. So in manufacturing, 24/7 uptime, what do you do when they say, okay, I need that kind of access? And you guys have seen companies that are trying to provide solutions to this, and then there's Rockwell Partners and other. I'm sure you guys under your distribution have some products that are trying to provide secure VPN access through cell modems. It's a step better. It's still not something that I prefer, but the legacy aspect of it is before they had a secure remote access point to point, people just signed up for a cell modem and plugged these things in. So this is, the world as it is today. So moving forward, what can we do about this? What GrantTech proposes in this state is to start out and do a baseline assessment of that site. And that's going to start to show us a number of things. The reason for that is when you ask a client, how vulnerable are you for cybersecurity, or how connected is your plant? Some of them they might have a bit of a clue as to how connected their devices are, whether they're on DH plus RIO, ControlNet, or maybe they have a full Ethernet network, or maybe they kind of have things that are islands and they've plugged stuff together as they needed to. But they're probably not going to have a total picture. They're probably not going to have documentation, which is a risk to them. It's also an increase in cost when they try to bring in a new product and a new conveyor, a new line, a new whatever they're trying to do. It's going to be very difficult, and they're not going to know up front how much it costs to integrate that into their existing setup. So what we do is we propose doing this at baseline assessment and fairly low cost initiative, and that'll give them a kind of a snapshot of what they have today. Additionally, what shakes out of that frequently is other projects, say PLC5 upgrades or drive upgrades or other systems that when we go through and we do an assessment of, hey, what kind of risk do you guys have? What is coming down the pipeline as far as new projects and business drivers? And how do we put all that together and provide the connectivity that you need? Sometimes completely unrelated projects come out. The second stage of that, of course, is a secure upgrade to the network and controls in order to fit whatever their drivers are. Every client's got different reasons. Most of them point back to needing the connectivity upgrade. So what I did here is a couple of questions that you guys can be asking. So cybersecurity, fear of the unknown. One of the biggest ones based off of the Shodan that I was showing you guys earlier is, tell me about your vendor remote access policy. Do you have OEMs that are putting stuff on your network that probably has a cell modem in it that, they're paying for, they're charging you for, they get the support that they need, but maybe that vendor can then access other vendors' equipment. So vendor remote access policy. Other questions are, we do a lot of projects where we're getting requirements for manufacturing data to be transferred between the control systems and the business systems. So how certain are you that that data is secure? How certain are you that that reverse path is not vulnerable to some sort of either malicious or unintentional attack or outage? And this is where you get into a lot of the classic corporate IT security policies versus the required speed and uptime of the manufacturing world. And when you start plugging those systems together, if you don't do it in a planned fashion, there's a lot of hiccups, there's a lot of pain, and clients, we can help avoid that. What decisions does your business make based on that data that you're getting? And what would happen if that was wrong, whether intentionally or unintentionally? Other questions you could be asking is look at the industry regulations. This is something that you'll know when you're going into a client, right? You know the industry, you know the regulations that they're going to be. Power generation, very, very, controls related. What could possibly happen that would affect the grid negatively? If you're talking about, generation, distribution, et cetera, that's very regulated risk-wise by NERC. And from our experience, what we've seen is that risk category that they assign is fairly accurate until you get down to the end devices. And once you get down there, there's not a lot of knowledge, and that's being more and more exposed as the industry matures, and our clients aren't quite following that as quickly as they need to be. Food and beverage, employee, competitor wanted to damage your product. Could you detect that? Could you see that someone was modifying, your controls? Do you have Asset Center doing audits? Simple product sale there. What is the cost of them to a recall? Most of our clients would find that the cost of a single recall is more than the cost of implementing something like Asset Center in order to do those checks. Outside of that, how do you prevent unknown threats from creating unsafe conditions? So talking about Stuxnet as a threat a while ago, nation state targeted, and plenty of information around that. But the goal of that was to cause physical damage to the centrifuges. That, aside from machine damage, threats like that could cause personnel damage, loss of life. That's increasing and huge. Then the other question that I like to ask is, do you have difficulty working with your corporate IT security groups? And why? Do they know, do they understand, or they just dislike the other side of the fence per se? And you can Google this. I didn't put the picture in here, but In the IT world, they use what they call the CIA triad. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it's placed in that order because in corporate IT, confidentiality is the most important aspect. Availability, it's the least important aspect. So if there is a security breach, if you're trying to guess your password 3 times, what do? Confidentiality, they lock your account. In the controls world, we look at it as the AIC triad. Looks like I typed that wrong, sorry. The AIC triad would be availability first. So if you have an operator guessing his password wrong and he gets it wrong 3 times, you don't want to shut the entire line down. That's not going to fit the world. So these guys fundamentally are different in their job priorities, and classically that's why they don't get along. So being able to start to bridge that political gap and help these teams understand where they need to be in order to work in today's society and today's goals is critical, and it's going to get you that business. It's going to drive that business, because if you make their life easier, then that's the path that they're going to choose, right? The path of least resistance. Some other components on the physical side is physical access control of the networks. Could a vendor, employee, visitor access systems, they're not authorized. How would you work to correct this without decreasing the availability of your production? Do you use wireless devices on your manufacturing network? Who maintains this? A lot of times we find corporate IT, they put in handheld scanners, they're connected to their ERP, and they're used in conjunction with the manufacturing network, but does the IT team really understand the needs of the operators, or do they have to log in and then it times out after 5 minutes and they have to re-log in, and it really slows them down? There's certainly ways that we can work to solve these problems and educate both sides. And here's another, kind of little prod at how priorities are different. Passwords, using the same password for everything. In the IT world, that's a very well known, don't do it. In the controls world, it's very common because you have different people working on things, you have different contractors working on things. To have to stop and look up a password when a system is down, that's more downtime, that's more lost money, and people don't want to do it. Access control, difficult. Contractors coming in, we can't lock them out because they have to be the ones that get us back up and running when there's an outage. As I mentioned earlier, manufacturing systems, well, they're fairly complicated. They're custom. They're not, you don't just drop in and install Office. You don't just drop in and install a program and okay, you update, and there you go. It's custom designed for their process, and some of them are kept in service for 20 plus years. To be realistically expecting that to be patched every month is, something that the industry will get to eventually. It's going to have to with the pace of today's society. But you can't just come in and say, we're going to go from doing nothing to doing everything in the IT space, right? It's the resistance as well as the disruption would be much too great. And it's a long process, it's a learning process to understand how to do that without disrupting manufacturing. So a little about, what kinds of individuals are going to be buying cybersecurity per chance. And what I would say here is that depending on the industry, you're not going to get someone that comes up to you and says, I want to buy cybersecurity. You're going to get some people that come up to you and they're looking at doing other types of initiatives, and they have been pushed to make sure that that initiative is secure. Or maybe they have that understanding on their own and they're looking for that. So this is where partners like GrantTech and distributors, when you guys are educated and able to speak on this topic, when they're looking at a couple of different opportunities and you kind of stick out as being cyber aware or a good cyber citizen, then that's going to it's going to lower the barrier to entry at the plant level, and at the corporate level, you'll be a godsend, because the corporate teams, security teams, are looking at these things and they're saying everybody in the controls industry is, they don't want to do anything for security and patching, and it's, et cetera, et cetera. So if you come in and you show that thought leadership and you're conscious about cybersecurity, then it's going to immediately give you credibility. So at the root of anything, why do we act? Why do we act? Because we feel pain. So cybersecurity rise, regulatory compliance and fines, that's going to cause pain. If you find that they have had some sort of an outage, etc., some of these things you could read in the news. You could be poking around that, the Shodan there and find some opportunities, right? So regulatory is one item. PR, recalls, outages, failure to ship, someone messed up and shut something down, and that cybersecurity and security in that aspect, in order to prevent accidental outages, becomes very important. And what on that flip side, the cost of the outage, what is the return on investment for them? Cybersecurity is more about prevention of outage. The ROI calculation is much more difficult because you can't guarantee that there's going to be a cyber attack tomorrow. You can't guarantee that they're going to get infected with Wannacry, or it's a preventative measure that's going to help them over time. Those who predict this kind of pain would be corporate security teams. And again, so when you're talking to plant managers, quality managers, engineering managers, then if you're talking about doing a project with them and they're under any kind of a mandate from their corporate teams, then that's going to make their lives easier. They're going to be more likely to want to work with and buy from you because you show that expertise. In this space, anybody can be a sponsor. It could be a small initiative. It could be a plant-wide initiative. Frequently, we find that these smaller initiatives, we're able to grow into enterprise initiatives. And if we enter the door with an engineering manager or engineering personnel, and once we establish that, hey, these are the best practices, this is the way to do these things, we get wind of that up to the corporate security teams, corporate IT. And because there is so little expertise in this space across the industry today, those corporate teams immediately latch onto those partners that have an understanding here, and they will carry them into other plants, into other initiatives. And that's really where, companies like GrantTech strive to partner with these guys and spread that business and grow those opportunities as much as possible. So here's, Wannacry. I don't know if how many people are aware of that, but basically a couple weeks ago, within a very short time, this threat went wild. It infected over 250,000 systems. And it was actually unintentionally turned off. It had a kill switch of a domain name that didn't exist. Security researcher registered that domain name, trying to figure out what was going on, set it up. All the Wannacry system had to do was try to hit it, and if it got a response, then it shut itself down. So interesting. There's going to be copycat exploits. There's going to be other things, etc. But think about a controls network. If this is released on a controls network today, as it is, most controls networks, and none of them should, most of them don't have direct internet access. So this threat, as it is today, would just continue to spread. It would encrypt. It's called a crypto worm. It would encrypt the contents of your HMIs if they're running Windows. It would encrypt the contents of your laptops, your maintenance laptops, and the outage of this, there's you can't decrypt these systems today. There's nothing that they can do about that, and it wouldn't turn off. It would just continue to spread because these systems aren't patched. So even though the world was disrupted very shortly for this, and then it kind of it fell off the focus of the radar. When these things start popping up in the ICS world, they're not going to go away. So here's a brief package on what GrantTech can help offer Royal and CED in order to push this through your clients. So seminars, workshops, really what we're focusing on here is a network of the future. So some clients, there's more focus now on networks and cybersecurity. So you might have a client ask us, hey, we need a network, or we need a new network, or we need to connect these devices. How do we do that? Step one is doing an assessment for the requirements. It's a couple days on site. We work with you, and we would work with the client to figure out what vendors we'd be leveraging and what the connectivity needs are in the scope of the project, et cetera. And then phase 2, 3, 4, I mean, normal project execution. But it starts with that assessment to start to understand what is there, learn about the client, learn about the needs and the opportunities. Coming out of that assessment, here's just a very generic Acme Corporation example of the kinds of things that we would take a look at within that plant. And this may generate follow-up projects for you directly or for other vendors. It really is designed to start to provide a risk analysis and prioritization for the client, because most of the time they come in and they don't know what they need to do to get from A to Z. They know that they need temperature data from these systems and they want to see them on their phone. They have no idea, nor do they really care to that much degree about how that data is transferred. They just know they need it. So I want to go through a couple of projects and specifically highlight how your involvement would be beneficial, as well as how a partnership with GrantTech will benefit you guys. So this specific relationship here, it was a GrantTech core client, and we were doing a remediation of Windows Server 2003 manufacturing systems. So the original scope was around 2 million, 6 plants within the US, and 0 hardware. There was no plan from the corporate teams to do any kind of hardware remediation. What we did is we came in and we took a look at the infrastructure they had, and you'll see in some of the next slides, we showed to them that there is huge vulnerability, and one of their specific plants was experiencing quite a bit of downtime because of outdated physical infrastructure. So we were able to expand that project by $1 million, and 500,000 of that was in hardware, Panduit, APC, Liebert, et cetera, which is all within the wheelhouse of Royal and CED. And we added that to the scope. So we took a project that had nothing like that, and through our thought leadership provided quite a good solution to the client. We're able to add that hardware in there. So this is the one example I have some pictures of for you. And the outage was caused by whenever they had a phone tech walking across these cables you see across the floor here, they would trip over them. Okay, really simple. You think not, but that would cause manufacturing downtime because those systems ran everything on the shop floor. They had over 300 unplanned production down hours a year because of outages like this. So what we did is we put in about $300K a project in doing remediation over multiple phases, but 60,000 of that was hardware direct procured through our partnership with Royal CED. And that was mostly Panduit hardware in this case, and simple value add to that project. Another example I would go into is this is in the solar generation area. Distributor and Rockwell partnership is what brought this lead. What happened was we had some initial SCADA involvement selling VUSE to the client. And we started working with their SCADA team, and we got involved with their corporate IT teams. Specifically, the reason why we were able to push this relationship was because we showed expertise in our understanding of NERC SIP, as well as our understanding of how to design networks at that low controls level. This client specifically had a very, very structured IT space. They brought that down all the way to the controls layer, and then they hung a single Cisco switch off of that, and they plugged in Hirschman switches. They just plugged stuff into it and didn't pay any attention to that. So we were able to show them quite a lot of benefit in that space for actually starting to build out a proper ICS network. And through that partnership, over the past 3 years, we generated over 2 million in hardware. So that was Cisco, Panduit, Rockwell, ProSoft. We leveraged that partner to fabricate the panels and do a lot of the checks for us. And additionally, we were putting in about 25K per site of Rockwell software, again, through the distributor. So that was about 1 million over the last 3 years in that space. And all of that started just based off of a single SCADA project. So engagement process kind of threw this together. Really, we need you guys because you interact with the clients, your clients on a daily basis. You see these things walking around the plants and talking with your contacts there. And what we can bring to the table is providing the confidence to those clients through our subject matter experts in each one of those spaces. And that's going to drive the clients to act because you can identify, you can point at something, but unless they understand the need and feel the pain and are educated around what they need to do, then it's not going to be a priority. It's going to possibly be a reaction later on when there's something outage wise or something that causes that pain. But to bring that thought leadership and education to them up front is really where we're going to start generating these projects. So simply for the team on here, the contact would be Svetlana Polona. She is our business development manager for the Western US and Canada. Her contact information is here. And really, our process here is fairly simple, but we want to make sure that we qualify, assess, and execute correctly with you guys, and then we grow. We continue. GrantTech is very much about building our partnerships with our clients, vendors, and distributors, and we want to make sure that we're able to do that successfully. So with that, about 40 minutes in here, and we have a little bit of time for some kind of open discussion and/or questions. If anybody has something, I'll open that up now.
Chris, in your document, do we quantify risk in a dollar amount? Is there any way of doing that?
So depending on, since a lot of these assessments, if these assessments are with a new client, then depending on if they're willing to release that kind of information, it's something we generally ask for. If we can't qualify it exactly in dollars, then we'll be able to qualify that in, okay, this is what we know about your industry. You're a CPG, you make this, it probably, this volume, you probably are, producing this much per hour. This is the kind of expense that you might cause and incur for some kind of an outage. So we can certainly provide hours calculations, and if we're able to get, as that relationship develops, then we certainly will have a better ability to provide exact cost figures. But from the get-go, it depends on the client and whether they're willing to release that information.
Okay.
And some of the Royal CED guys, you may have a fairly good understanding of that going in, which is a huge value to us. If we're able to present this report with those figures, obviously that's going to drive much quicker decisions because it's fairly black and white to make that decision. Okay, if there are no further questions, then I'm going to wrap